Compared to the beginning of 2022, most cars decreased in value. Yes, decreased. That's something that we didn't see for a long time. Car prices of course surged during the pandemic, but by the time that spring of 2022 arrived, momentum decreased considerably. Two-digit price increases were replaced by one-digit increases or even flat price developments. What happened during the summer was then also inevitable. Markets stopped almost across the board and prices started to decrease. In the fall, the initial decrease rate accelerated slightly, but it has been relatively stable ever since. And this means that most cars are again depreciating assets, like they should be. A result of this is that the prices for most sports and supercars are 5% lower than in the beginning of 2022. Yes, for most cars. Some cars decreased much more. The top 5 cars that lost the most value lost on average 15%. But more about that soon. We'll first look at some aggregate market statistics and then look at the price trends for those cars. Towards the end of the video, we'll discuss some commonalities and if we can expect these extortionate depreciation rates to continue in the future. We'll wrap up with a little evaluation of 2022 and with the things that you can expect regarding the channel in 2023. Over here you can see a histogram that shows the year-on-year price changes for most cars that feature on my channel. So what can we see here? On the horizontal axis, you can see the year-on-year change magnitude bins. For example, this bin over here represents the cars that lost between -2.9 and -7.9%. On the horizontal axis, in turn, we can see that this concerns 39 cars. So for 39 cars, prices decreased by -2.9 to -7.9%. And as you can see from the height of the bar, this is the largest category. Unsurprisingly, most cars lost -4.8%. Now I also used this graph in last week's video. In that video we had a look at the cars that increased the most in value. So if you're interested in the right hand side of this histogram, then I recommend that you click right over here. In that video we also discussed some limitations to this graph. In short, you need to know that this graph is based on the cars for which I'm tracking the prices. It is therefore based on an unrepresentative sample of the market, as I tend to track prices for cars that might go up in value or have some sort of other interesting price development. A result of this is that there's a heavy right tail. Second, you need to know that the individual price changes are not always based on exactly 12 months or December of this year versus December of last year. I simply don't have all that data. So sometimes the price change is based on November 2021 to November 2022 or, for example, November 2021 to December 2022. A consequence of all of this is that we cannot read too much into the details. If one car dropped by 3.5% and another one by 4.5%, it might be the result of chance, or simply a slightly different time period. However, we can trust that a car for which values increased by 10% has indeed stronger prices than a car for which values decreased by 10%. But let's start to zoom into the details and figure out which cars lost the most. Over here we can see the data on which the histogram is based on. Each bar represents the price change for a different car, and I left out the names of the cars on purpose. It would be too small to read. Now in this video, we'll focus on the left hand side of the graph, so the cars that decreased the most. If we zoom in, we can see that there are 83 cars for which values decreased, and the text might be a bit small, but I will point out each car when I talk about it. Now just by browsing through these names, we can see that many 911s and Ferraris are included. Again, this is because I'm tracking the prices for many Ferraris and Porsches. On average, these cars lost 7%, but there are some surprising and also less surprising results. At the top we find a few Ferraris, the Lusso V12, the F12 and the California. Prices for these cars hardly change. This is not so surprising, I think. What is more surprising is the relatively high ranking of the AMG GTR. With -2.6%, it did slightly better than, for example, a 991.1 GT3. Looking a bit further to the left, we can see that the Boxster and Cayman GTS 4-liter rank relatively low. With 10.5 and 8.8%, they clearly rank more towards the left than towards the right hand side. Also, the latest generation Panamera doesn't rank so high. Over here we find the S and GTS, and a bit more to the right we find the base version. These rates are perhaps less surprisingly. Before the pandemic, the depreciation rates were quite high for these cars. But now then, let's zoom into the top 5 cars that lost the most. There are some surprising results in there. Over here we can see that we have the Alfa Romeo 4C, the 981 Cayman S, the second generation BMW i8, the Toyota Landcruiser J200 facelift and the Ferrari SF90. And if you would have asked me at the beginning of 2022 which cars I would have included in this list, I definitely wouldn't have included the 981 Cayman S and the Alfa Romeo 4C. The second gen i8 and the Landcruiser are less surprising. Also the inclusion of the SF90 is quite surprising, but there are some peculiarities that we need to take into account. Now let's start by looking at the price trend for the 4C. I did not expect this car to show such a high loss rate. And if we look at the price trend, I think you'll understand why. Prices were exceptionally stable between March and September. In this period, prices in many markets already decreased. In the 4C market though, prices only came down between September and December, and they came down hard. Prices dropped by 13.5% or $9,000. However, long-term 4C owners are still looking at a gain, as prices are up by 17.5% or $8,500 compared to March 2020. Now when I saw this price drop for the first time, I thought that there was an issue in the data or that there was a big change in the market composition, but none of those things occurred. Supply is basically unchanged and the median mileage increased slightly, but not enough to explain the large decrease. Moreover, if we look at the price development per mileage bucket, we can see that the drop is visible in the complete market. Cars with high and cars with low mileages are affected. It's only when we split the aggregate price trend by roof type that we can see that it are especially the coupes that are responsible for the price decrease. I drilled down a bit further into this decrease for the coupes, but I couldn't find any explanation for the rapid drop other than that prices simply decreased. If you know what's happening in this market, please comment down below. Now to check if the price development is indeed correct, I also had a look at the data from AutoTempest. AutoTempest conveniently pulls listings from a bunch of different websites into one place so that you can browse through all of them. Check out the links in the description to find the 4Cs for sale right now. Their data also shows that prices decreased, let it be a bit less, but it also revealed another interesting trend that supports our current findings. Over here we can see the average advertised time for a 4C, and the idea behind this is that it tells us something about the scarcity level in the market. The lower the advertised time, the quicker the cars sell, the higher the scarcity level. Looking at the trend, we can see that the advertised time dipped during the pandemic, and this is what we have seen across the markets. However, the trend has been upward since the end of 2021. It even accelerated during the last few quarters, and this is of course in line with what we can see in the prices. And with that, it's time to have a look at the 981 Cayman S price trend. Again, a car that I didn't expect to find in this list. Let's check it out. Over here we can see that prices decreased by 14.7% between November 2021 and November 2022. However, this decrease is mainly taken during the last 3 months. Prices decreased by 12.5% or $7,600 between August and November 2022. But again, long-term owners are still looking at a gain. Compared to February 2021, prices are up by $3,800 or 7.9%. Now visually, this price trend is quite similar to the one that we just saw in the 4C market, but this trend is more easy to explain. We can see that there's a change in market composition. In August, the average mileage was 33,500 miles, whereas it was 48,000 miles in November. Of course, the higher the mileage, the lower the price, so the price drop is slightly exaggerated. Yet, if we add the base market to the plot, we can see that also over there prices decreased. In fact, they decreased by 8.8% in the most recent period. The mileage increase was also quite significant in that market, but it's likely to give a more accurate representation of what actually happened. Another interesting thing to mention is that the price changes apply to both the manuals and the PDKs. The transmission type is of relatively little importance for the development of the price trend. I by the way covered the complete Cayman market a few weeks ago, so you can click over here if you want to check out the price trends for the other models. Let's move on to the BMW i8. Over here we have the price trend for the second generation. And we can see that prices decreased by 15.9% or $20,000 between October 2021 and October 2022. This decrease rate is somewhat similar to the pre-pandemic rate. Moreover, this drop pushed prices below their pre-pandemic values. As you probably figured, this trend is different from the market trend. The increase rate during the pandemic is relatively low, resulting in a trend that is more downward sloping than the market trend. If we split the data by the roof type, we can see that there is no difference between the coupes and the convertibles. Also, the underlying supply development is similar. Supply topped in April 22, but has been decreasing ever since. The coupe, in fact, starts to become quite rare. There were only 21 cars listed for sale in October. Interestingly, this drop in supply brought supply levels on par with the first generation market. If I add that generation to the graph, we can see that the price development is flatter. Of course, prices still decreased in 2022, but they are still up by 7.1% or $4,800 compared to October 2019. And with that, it's time to have a look at the Landcruiser. Over here we have the price trend for the Landcruiser J200, the facelift version to be precise. This price trend is a great example of what happened in the car market. Prices started to top in the beginning of 2022 and have been decreasing ever since. Compared to the market top, values decreased by roughly 17% or $17.1 thousand, and this brought them back to pre-pandemic levels. But wait a moment. What happened to the idea that Land Cruisers have some of the lowest depreciation rates? Well, I still think that they have, but in the current market situation, new cars cannot escape depreciation. Over here we have the price development split by model year, and this reveals that the price decrease is driven by the youngest cars. 2021 cars, for example, lost 19% since the beginning of the year, while values for 2018, 2017 and 2016 cars were stable. So this means that since the beginning of 2022, the Land Cruiser followed your typical expected depreciation path. But now then, let's have a look at the SF90. Over here we can see that prices have been decreasing since its introduction. Compared to last year, they dropped by 17.9% or, and I hope that you're sitting down, $170,000. Now there are a few things that we need to take into account when we look at this trend. The first data point is based on only 5 cars, so it might not give a correct indication of the market price. Yet, supply quickly grew and sits now at 82 cars. Second, when we get at this level in the market, the difference between the listing and selling price might be of importance to the trend. It is difficult to get a sense of selling prices as there are not so many people buying an SF90, let alone reaching out to me to share their buying experience. The data though fully supports this aggressive drop of 18%. It is visible in all market segments. Under my previous Ferrari market update video, there was also someone who commented that a Toronto dealer decreased the price from $999,000 to $919,000. It is just one piece of anecdotal evidence, but it does support the data. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. What a surprising result was that? The top 5 cars that lost the most during 2022. Contrary to the top 5 increases, we cannot deduce many similarities between the cars. Looking at the top 3, we can say that the new i8s, Land Cruisers and SF90s had relatively steep depreciation paths in the beginning of their lifetime. That is, compared to the rest of the cars for which I'm tracking the prices. The pandemic shook things up a bit, but the cars appear to be following their initial depreciation trajectory again. The Alfa Romeo 4C and Porsche Cayman 981 form a larger mystery. Their pre-pandemic depreciation rates weren't excessive, and their price increase during the pandemic were also not excessive. Both cars do belong though to the entry-level sports cars. Therefore, the drop might be the result of people who got one during the pandemic and now want to get rid of it. Now the motivation for this could be financial, but it could be also just the fact that they tick the box of owning a sports car. But all of this is just speculation. Please comment down below if you have any idea why these cars made it to the list. And with that, it's time to move on to the channel update. As I mentioned before, 2022 was an amazing year to have a car price analytics YouTube channel. We saw large price movements up and down, and this makes for interesting videos. Looking back at 2022, I tried to include more cars in one video. So instead of just making a video about the 996 Carrera, I included all generations. This of course means that some details got lost, but I think that it worked quite well in general. Besides the model specific videos, I also did quarterly updates on the exotic and normal used car market. And these videos were fairly popular. So also this is something that I will keep doing in 2023. Videos that were not so popular are the ones about niche sports cars. Think about the V Advantage, the LC500 or Lotus Evora. I mean, it's understandable. The target audience is small when you compare it to the 911 market. So perhaps I will combine all of these smaller market segments into one regular market update video. But I didn't decide on it yet. What I did decide though is that the following things will change in 2023. First, and this is by far the biggest item, is that I will make the data available to everyone. It's something that I've been working on for quite a while, and I hope to finalize it this year. Second, I'm planning to include the European market. First the German one, as it forms a decent proxy for the mainland markets and later the UK market. And this has been requested by many of you. Third, I aim to upgrade this microphone and this studio, if you can call it like that. I sometimes read comments that point out that the sound quality is bad or that the speech is difficult to follow. Some of this might be the result of my accent, but there's also a large part that is the result of the microphone. There's a significant echo in this room due to the high ceilings, and I suppress this echo by using software, but the end result often leaves a lot to be desired. Fourth and final, the variety of the cars will increase. This will be a gradual process as it takes a while before I have sufficient data for a video, but you should notice this throughout next year. Now having said all of that, this channel isn't my main job, so I cannot guarantee that all of these plans will be finalized. Nevertheless, I would like to say a big thank you to all of you for watching the videos, and I hope that you will continue to use the channel to stay up to date on the car market.